So the last thing we actually need to do with regards to the albums is actually create the delete album function and allow us to delete an album. Now we're going to need a page for this. If I just close edit album.php, let's go over to our page and click on delete. You'll notice that it works in a similar way. We've got delete album.php and we specify this album ID get variable in the top here, and that corresponds to the album ID that you click, or the album that you click. So we need to create this delete album.php file. Let's go ahead and create a new file, and let's call that delete album.php. Okay, so delete album.php doesn't actually use the header and the footer template files, so therefore we can just go ahead and include init.php. The reason it doesn't include the template files is because it simply we pick up the get variable that we've specified up here. We check this. We check that the album belongs to us, as we've done when we edit the album. Then we just call the delete album function, which is found in the album.func.php file, and then we redirect the user to the albums page. So let's go ahead and think about what we need to do here. The first thing we want to do is check if the user is logged in or not. If they're not logged in, we want to redirect them. So we go header, and we say location index.php, and we then exit the script, which is extremely important. Now the next thing we want to do is check that the album is ours. So we can make use of the album check function. So I'm going to say if not, or if album check $_get album ID. Remember, this here corresponds to this here, and if this is equal to false, then we also want to redirect the user. So we can use the header function again, location albums.php, and then exit the script. Now below this we're going to write the code that will actually delete the album. So we can say if is set, and we want to check that the $_get album ID variable is set. So if that's set, we can go ahead and actually delete the album. So we call the delete album function. We then relocate the user. So location album.php. Exit we don't really need to do, but just out of habit. So let's just overview what we've done. We've checked if the user's logged in. If they're not logged in, we relocate them to index.php. If the album doesn't belong to us, i.e. if the album check function, by specifying the album ID, returns false, we locate them to albums.php. This will just stop people modifying this value here and deleting other people's albums, because that would be possible if we didn't have this check in place. We also then need to check if the album ID is set, and if it is set, we need to delete the album, and again we need to specify in here the album ID. So under here we can just say album ID is equal to $_get album ID. We don't really need to redefine the variable, we could just put this here in here, but I just like to reset the variables just in case we need to use them further down the page. So now that we've done this, that's all well and good, but it won't actually delete our album. At the moment, if we were to come back and click on delete, it just redirects us to album.php. It redirects us to albums.php. So let's just refresh that. Delete. Doesn't really do anything. The reason it doesn't do anything is because we haven't created our delete album function. So this is pretty straightforward. Obviously one of the parameters is the album ID. We need to sanitize this and make sure it's an integer value, because what we haven't done is sanitize this here. So we want to sanitize it at root level, so at the function level, just in case we use this function elsewhere and forget to sanitize any other data. So we redefine the variable, so album ID is equal to, and we cast as an integer, album ID. What we then want to do is perform a query. Now there's two queries that we need to perform. The first query will actually delete the album itself. The second query will delete all images within that album in the database table. So we need to delete the actual album itself. So for example, if we deleted Fun in the Sun, that would delete this row here. Now if there were any images where the album ID corresponded to this album ID, we would have to delete them images as well. We would also have to remove the directories that are created when we actually create our album. Remember, we create directories where images will eventually be stored. Now there is a problem here. The unset function in the rmdir function, in PHP will remove a directory successfully, but only if it's empty. There's no function in PHP that will allow you to delete a folder that contains any files, and for this reason I'm going to leave this in the tutorial and not actually include it in the tutorial. And the reason for this is so you can go away and find a way to delete an album with the content, and you'll need to do this by recursively deleting everything inside of the folder before you delete the album. So I'm just going to add a to do here. Use a method to delete all files from album folder and thumbs folder. Okay, then the directory. So I'm leaving that for you to do. It's entirely your choice whether you delete the folder and all the images. You might want to preserve the images on your server. However, I would probably recommend you actually delete these just to save server space. It's entirely up to you, but if you want to go ahead and have a go at that, then that's probably a good thing to practice. So the next thing we want to do is actually, well, the final thing we want to do is actually perform the queries to delete the album from the database and any images that are in that album from the database. So we perform one query here and then one query below it. So this query is delete from, and obviously first of all we're deleting from albums, and this is where the album ID is equal to album ID and user ID is equal to, and then session user ID. Now the reason we do this, we've already obviously created a check in delete album to make sure that this is our album. However, if you were to use this function elsewhere and you forgot to include this check, it would allow anyone to delete albums. So really we're using two methods of security in order to ensure that other people don't delete our albums. So probably twice, two checks are better than one. So the second query is going to delete all images. Obviously we haven't uploaded any images at the moment, but later on when we start to upload images to directories and upload images and store them in the database, not the actual images in the database but their reference, then it will delete all images as well. So delete from images where album ID is equal to album ID and user ID is equal to, and then we append the session on again. So session user ID. So now this function is complete. What it's going to do is when we go over to delete album, we're getting this get variable from the URL. We are obviously checking if the user's logged in, but we are also checking it belongs to us or the current user that's logged in. We're then deleting the album by calling the delete album function, relocating the user. The delete album function will delete the album from the database corresponding to the album ID we specified, and it'll also delete all the images in the image table where the album ID is equal to the same thing. So we're deleting the images and the album. So obviously I've spoken about this method to delete the folders themselves, which you can go ahead and do yourself. So let's go ahead and test this. Let's go over to our albums table, and you can see the two entries in here. Let's go over to our albums page. We've got Fun in the Sun and Holiday 2. Let's say I wanted to delete Holiday 2. When I click on this, it's going to pass the album ID and continue with the process that I've explained. So when we click it, it just disappears. It was instant, but it did relocate. It did actually, the page did go to delete album.php and then refer us back to albums.php. We can also then delete Fun in the Sun as well, and then we get the standard message, you do not have any albums. So now let's go ahead and check in our database. Obviously these will have disappeared. If we click browse, you can see that MySQL returned an empty result set. So we've deleted these from the database, and we've essentially just deleted both the albums that we have. We could go ahead and create a new album now, then we could go ahead and edit it and then delete it. So our albums functionality is now complete, and we have successfully created all the functions that we originally outlined in our album.func.php file.